is Alex Dittmore. Here we go. Let me share my screen with you. So hello, good morning, West Coast folks. Taylor and I are actually both, surprisingly, are getting two East Coast people today. So luckily for us, it's the afternoon. But for you, it's the morning. So thank you for spending your morning with us. Again, my name is Alex Dittmore, she, her pronouns, and I am a training and content development coordinator with National Harm Reduction Coalition. I started here, I'm bringing up my slides. So I started here in the fall of last year. And prior to that, I did 9 years of direct care service. So I started out in inpatient mental health and like inpatient psychiatric, locked group homes, things like that. And then I went directly into street outreach, doing sexual health outreach, peer work for sexual violence and drug user health. And then for the last 3 years before starting here, I ran a drop-in center in Hartford, Connecticut. And we served folks who are using drugs, sex workers, as well as people experiencing homelessness. So I have always done direct care. Honestly, when I did inpatient, I always did higher level of need sort of work. So I'm very accustomed to like conflict management and de-escalation. I luckily have Taylor with us today, who also has a wealth of knowledge in direct care. So just kind of shout out for all y'all, because direct care workers are very, very close to my heart, because it is hard work that y'all do. Like seriously, seriously, seriously. And before we get into Taylor's intros as well, when it comes to like how to talk with us, yeah, I really prefer when people just like, you can raise your hand, whatever, come off of mute and just talk. You can drop it in the chat. If you feel like uncomfortable having like your name kind of attached to your question, you can always direct message it to like me or Taylor, and we can just say it without saying your name. We are definitely not webinar type people at all. We're not webinar folks. Like, I want interaction. The whole point of this is to like have real conversation, and like ideally have it where if you want to have a question, you answer, you ask it here. That's the whole point of being here, right? It's not just for us to talk at you, because honestly, all of you have been practicing harm reduction in a variety of ways. And I really think that these trainings end up showing folks that you do this already. I'm just going to kind of teach you some like better tips and tricks, maybe like reframe some sort of language, add a little sauce to it. Why do we do what we do? Why do people want me to talk to you about this? And things like that. Can everyone see my screen that says Foundations of Harm Reduction?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Oh, I love you already. I got people who are good to come off of mute. You can have your camera on. Ideally, love seeing faces. I have two screens because I think it's weird talking to the void, but I don't push it. Like, if you want to like come off your screen, whatever, like you don't need to. It's fine. I'm used to talking to little black boxes on the screen now in my apartment. And without further ado, Taylor, you want to give a little intro of yourself before we get into the workshop overview?
Sure. Thank you so much, Alex. That was a nice intro. I love it. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. I mean, it's a little after 1 here, but that just means it's time for a second coffee, right? So my name is Taylor Edelman. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm also working with Alex at the National Harm Reduction Coalition. My title is LGBTQIA+ Health and Harm Reduction Manager. What does that even mean? What does that look like? So I manage a program called the Lighthouse Learning Collective, which is where we specifically look at the intersection of harm reduction and queer health. So particularly, we're interested in talking to LGBTQIA+ folks and talking about the work they do and how harm reduction can be more inclusive of queer bodies and queer identities, which is really ironic if you think about it, because the inception of harm reduction and where it started was really with queer people, particularly Black and brown queer people. So if you're interested in that work, I can share more information. We have monthly meetings that are open. I'm based out of New York City, even though Alex and I live in Connecticut, and like, yes, no, Connecticut's not known for its harm reduction scene. Yes, it's weird, and I get it. So right now, what we're doing is we're currently developing a toolkit that'll be out next year. That's going to be a guide for syringe service programs in New York City on how to incorporate better affirming care for queer participants. And then we're wrapping up our queer harm reduction training series, our Lighthouse Learning series, as we dub it. If you're into it, if you're interested, we have a training coming up this month, April 21st. It's 12 to 2 p.m. So that means for you folks, it'll be starting at 9 a.m. It's going to be on chemsex, which is going to be really great. We have an awesome provider. It's going to be doing that training. And then we're wrapping it up on the 28th of this month with a queer history of harm reduction, because we need to kind of know our origin story if we're going to move forward with this work. So as Alex is saying, I have a lot of experience. Actually, I've only ever had experience in direct services, direct care. I'm technically a licensed CHW, community health worker in the state of Connecticut. I started in chronic disease management, doing more like asthma and high blood pressure and all those things, and then moving into more Hep C, HIV, queer health, and then got my bearings with HIV case management. So I don't know if anybody does case management or has done it at some point. It is a huge job. It's very taxing. The burnout rate is really high. You're responsible for everything for, medical care, housing, food security. You have clients who are previously incarcerated, clients doing sex work, with just a whole range of needs. So that was really eye-opening. I also did a lot of like independent consulting work with health organizations, community-based organizations on how to make their practices or their basically how to guide them to be a little bit more affirming with their care because they're not great at it. So that's a lot of what I do now, what I focus on. So we can give you our info at the end because I'm sure it'll come up, but feel free to ask questions around that. So just really glad to see so many people on here. This is exciting. Thank you.
All right, and without further ado, a little bit about us. I won't spend too much time, but like, who are we? We told you a little bit. Where are we from? Why are we doing this? Where do we work for? So, which is nice about this is that Taylor and I both fall under this like training and technical assistance. He does a little bit of everything else because like he explained, Lighthouse Learning Collective is a specific program. My whole job now is literally this. So I meet with folks, I see if they need trainings, if they really just need resources, whether they be local, national resources, things like that. Sometimes folks just kind of need, I guess, like, where's the link in the right direction sort of thing. They don't know where to start, or I do tailored trainings. I have to say, like, I specifically got into this because, like Taylor said, there's a lot of burnout in this work. I see a lot of people who get into this work, love this work, and it changes them. They end up becoming like hardened versions of themselves where they're kind of enacting things that they didn't think that they would. And it's because you have this huge amount of work. A case manager is never just a case manager. You do more than housing. I know a lot of folks here are from different services, but particularly a lot of housing services and homelessness services. No, y'all do, yes, housing, and then therapy, de-escalation, harm reduction. You learn about everything else, and it's a hell of a lot more, and no one ever gets paid enough. And that's why for me, I really try to have these sort of conversations with folks in like a real sense. That's why Taylor and I both really like things to be interactive, because you get into this work because you care about people. This shit is hard and it's traumatizing, honestly. It's beautiful, it's rewarding, it's all of these wonderful things. It is also very difficult. Very, very difficult and forever changing and constantly changing, and there's never enough resources for it. So for me, I really like to try to promote, like, in spaces like this, for people to be able to talk about that stuff, like talk about it here, ask the weird, messy questions that you're kind of nervous to ask here. So that way we're not having like real uncomfortable conversations with a client because you asked them something mad personal because you didn't know what it meant and your intention was well, but we probably shouldn't have asked someone that. So besides me talking at people all day about harm reduction and why I love it, we also do really cool things around like policy and advocacy. We have a Hep Connect program, which specifically focuses on hepatitis C, with different syringe service programs in the South. We have policy programs that look at like 10 major states in the United States that are heavily, basically harm reduction is very criminalized. Taylor and I are on the East Coast. Y'all are in California. I'm originally from the Bay Area. Very, very blessed when it comes to, even though how much you have conservative folks, especially in inland California and Northern California, and that pushback, we still have a lot of privileges of what we've been able to do. I mean, there's places where you can't even hand out a fentanyl test strip, or you can't even hand out naloxone, which reverses overdoses. Meanwhile, my privileged ass over here in Connecticut has been able to hand out syringes since 96. Not me personally since 96. Sorry, I'm not Benjamin Button aging in reverse. And without further ado, little housekeeping. I just say have your name on there, pronouns if you're comfortable, but sometimes people will be like webinar 1, or they're using someone else's link. One time, particularly at our job, I think like all of us grab our coworker Hiawatha's links, and there's like 10 of us at once in a webinar with his name. So if y'all are doing that, just switch it so I know who you are. If you hear my dog in the background, I apologize. Every single time I do a training is when she likes to get vocal and needy. All right. So what are we talking about today? I gave you a little bit of an overview. Just like every training you do, we're going to do a little group agreements. And I know that they sound hokey, but like I said, we're talking about like, this isn't always easy. You know, we're going to be talking about drug use. We're going to be talking about sex work. We're going to be talking about what it means to work with folks who might be engaging in both of these things, one of these things, on top of all of the stuff that we have that we come to work with. Because, you know, we're whole human beings. We're not just employees and people that work. So we're going to talk about what harm reduction is. Why do people use drugs? I'm going to offer you a continuum of drug use. So just things to kind of like get those gears turning. And then we're going to take a step back and look at like, what is harm reduction? Because it's a heck of a lot more than just about drugs. Though today, Taylor and I are here to help contextualize it specifically for working with people who use drugs. I want people to step away from this and think of harm reduction as a frame of mind. It's literally, I'm trying to reduce harms. So, you know, drinking water, wearing sunscreen, putting on my seatbelt when I'm driving a car, like those are all ways to reduce possible harms and a risk behavior, right? And then we're going to get into some principles of harm reduction. People love a takeaway. They love a framework. We will provide it where it's kind of focusing on like 6 major principles. Why do we do that? I think this is the part where people start to realize that they already practice this or they already have these beliefs in their mind. But then also what challenges us the most. Just because I have a belief doesn't mean it's easy for me to come to it. Just because I know something's the right thing to do doesn't mean it's an easy thing to do. In fact, most of the time it's not too easy. And then we're going to get into unpacking harm. What is this RSS? It's risk set setting. If you ever had to look through a textbook or some sort of drug related course that talked about drug set setting, boom, all I did was broaden it. And we're going to talk about that. And we're going to get into just kind of like closing out with more of an activity. We will have a break again in between. We'll also have an activity during. And again, Taylor and I really push interaction. You can always just like raise your hand. You can come off of mute, ask a question. You can throw it in the chat. We both have multiple screens. We got it set up now, so we know how to be able to read it and manage that as well. And little glossary. Everyone gets the slides at the ends. Do not worry. You don't have to memorize all of these things. In the world of public health and social services, it is just a field of nothing but acronyms. Acronyms, acronyms, acronyms. All of these damn letters that mean the same thing, 50 versions of it to mean the same thing. That's why I'm giving you a little bit of this. So that way you can see it, particularly when it comes to drug use. You know, we're talking about overdose prevention centers. I know that the Bay Area has gone hard multiple times over and over and over trying to get these types of sites. Well, those sites are called safe consumption spaces, overdose prevention centers, overdose prevention sites, safe injection facilities, like 50 names, 50 acronyms for the same exact thing. So this is kind of really for you to just have on deck as like, oh, these are some of the common acronyms that we see. And then on the right-hand side, just kind of like, again, taking a step back when we're looking at folks that we interact with and recognizing that all of the things here, like a sex assigned at birth, our gender identity, how we express ourselves, who we love or are attracted to, they don't necessarily all match up in ways that society has told us they're supposed to. All right, group agreements. I know 3 years in that we are having all of these group agreements all the time. So what have you seen on here that you haven't seen before, or where you've seen it a million times and you're like, well, what exactly does that mean? You can drop it in the chat too, or y'all just Zoom pros and you're like, I know all the group agreements. And if you do, more power to you.
What's the weight, Elmo?
Thank you. Wait, Elmo. So Elmo, besides a lovely character that means a lot to me from my childhood, means everybody, let's move on. As someone who grew up being called long-winded, Elmo is a nice way to kind of say, all right, let's keep it moving. Additionally, sometimes folks can get into like a back and forth where it's just no longer really productive. It's like we're just kind of going at it. And it's like, listen, respectfully, like as of right now, we've got over 90 people on this call, and we want to make sure that folks can get through the material and we can still get that. Doesn't mean that we're shutting down a conversation. It just means like, let's move it. And you said wait. So wait is, why am I talking? And it's just not everybody feels comfortable talking. So if you find yourself as one of the folks who luckily likes to talk more, then just remember that not everyone feels comfortable. Just kind of give space for folks too. Anything else? Y'all know it all.
Can you
go
clarify
ahead.
the take names, not IDs?
Yes, take names, not IDs. So everyone here has been very, very kind to even put their names along with this. Ideally, you're going to learn from each other. Like a training space isn't just supposed to be for Taylor and I to talk at you the entire time. It's also supposed to kind of help frame conversations between y'all. And I've always learned most from other people, I'll be honest. And so it just means when you leave here, like, don't bring identifying information. Don't say, oh, Taylor was talking to me about his client. Yeah, John, who goes to this center. Yeah, and he was saying this, this, this. And like, even if it's something positive that you learned from it, just, don't take like the actual information with it. Yeah, exactly. I like that, Shelby. All right. And in the sake of time, every single training I facilitate, sorry, Taylor, you've been facilitating so many with me the past few weeks. I personally always emphasize, say it rough. So that is something that I'll just be real, I'm most accustomed to. I prefer when people speak directly with me, even if it doesn't come out in a way that I want to hear necessarily. I would rather someone be direct with me than passive aggressive or talking around things. I like to have that translate into a training space ideally, which is just that like, we are all human beings. I would much rather you just say like, listen, I don't quite know how to say this, but I got a question, or like I have a feeling or a thought about something. And we don't always have all the right language, right? I'd rather you not say anything because you're nervous about that. So you could just say, I'm going to say it rough, and it can come out and we can handle that. Taylor and I can handle that. Ideally, y'all can. And if you can't, that's fine. You can hop off your camera and things like that. But also understanding that intent doesn't equal impact, right? So as everybody has said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I might not mean to like say something maliciously, but I might say something that can hit real freaking hard for someone else. And you might not have meant for it to hit that hard, but that still happens. And in this space, we can do both, right? We can have it where it's like something can happen and we can address it and we can move on. Because if we can't, what the hell are we doing? Like for real, what are we doing? What are we doing working with people? What are we doing as a community and society if we just can't address it and try to move forward? If we can, of course, because some things are pretty freaking hard to forgive and bigger than us in this space. But we're going to be talking about harm reduction. And to me, that's all of it. And without further ado, Taylor, take it on over and tell me when to click, please, or I'll try to intuitively know.
Oh yeah, I know it's weird being on the other side, right? Because I'm such a control freak where I get to control the slides, and now I have to ask you to advance, but it's all good. So we're going to open this up by doing a little activity, and the reason for this is that even though it says defining harm reduction, I'm not actually going to give you a definition until, well, Alex is in the next section. Reason we do this though is we kind of have to deconstruct the framework around harm reduction and talk a little bit about why do people use drugs in the first place? Maybe why don't they use drugs? And I find that every time we do this, people have difficulty with one question over the other. So let us know what comes up for you when we do this exercise. I'm also going to post a link in the chat because we are using Jamboard, which is like a Google app. It's available if you're on your phone. You can download the Jamboard app. We'll give you a minute or two to do that. Oh, thank you, Alex. Did it at the same time. So Alex is going to switch screens over to that and open up the Jamboard. So if you navigate to that link, you'll open up with a slide. And the cool thing about it is that it's anonymous. It assigns you like a little animal or something. And then on the left-hand side, you have a whole bunch of tools. The easiest one that makes this one work really great is the sticky, which somebody clearly has already found. And yeah, so simple question, or seemingly simple question, right? Like, why do people use drugs? Why? Maybe with your own experience of a loved one, family member, maybe the people that you serve, clients you have, participants, whatever that is. So we'll give a few minutes here because we do have so many people, which is great. We have 95 people. So I'm hoping we get 95 reasons. Well, actually, I should subtract all of us. It's probably closer to like 92, 91. Yeah.
And we'll move them around too. And if folks are having a real hard time with Jamboard, it's okay. You can always drop things in the chat here too.
Yes.
And stuff like that. Jamboard's just cool because we get to save it. And honestly, it's nice to kind of see like what other folks bring to it.
Yeah. Thank you, Naomi. That's perfectly fine. Yeah, if you're comfortable putting in the chat, yep, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, I'm seeing traumatic experience, to get out of self, life challenges, right? There's so many things that could be considered a challenge. It's a challenge for me, might be different for you. To maintain, says Matthew, to maintain, right? Just trying to get by or trying to maintain. Oh, whoa, did they all get deleted on there, Alex? Oh no, somebody hit the clear frame button. Don't hit the clear frame button, then we're gonna delete everybody's comments. We want to keep them because what'll happen is that this is yours to keep. So when we give you the slides, this will be linked in there. So if you're like, I want to see how we did on that exercise, you'll be able to go back and take a look. But I'm seeing a lot of really good ones on here. Yeah, because if you hit clear frame, it's not just going to clear for you, it'll clear for everyone since it's a shared activity. So definitely don't do that, but everyone is doing great. Temporary escape, to stop the pain.
That tingling sensation.
Oh, tingly sensation, says Bob. I mean, I guess that could be one, right? If you're using drugs, you get a tingly sensation. I mean, could be. Who am I to judge? Avoid feelings, unresolved trauma and pain. Yeah, to get through whatever it is they're facing, to stop the pain. Yeah, feel relaxed, temporary escape. I'm seeing a lot of this similar language talking about trauma, escapism, you know, numbing, to try to dissociate, to try to separate ourselves from what we're experiencing, right? To feel relaxed, which is flipping it as a more positive framing, right? Using drugs, does it always have to be a negative connotation? Is it always a negative thing? Going back to the chat. It's fun, says Tracy. Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, absolutely, it's fun. That's totally valid. To identify with other people. Yep. To form connections with community, others. Yeah. To forget, peer pressure, self-medication. Yep. Chanel, some just like to be high. Yeah. Some people just like to be high. They like that feeling. Maybe that relaxes them. Maybe they just like being in that headspace. Yeah, a lot of great varying answers. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Autumn. Yeah, we like to use the Jamboard just because it gives us a break of talking at you. We really want to see what people are thinking in real time. Plus, since it's anonymous, we get kind of like unfettered thoughts instead. Sometimes with chat, you know, because your name is associated with it, people are like, I'm not super comfortable. So we just like giving as many options as possible, which is like harm reduction, right? Giving as many options and avenues as possible. I say a buffet of options, right? What works for me might not work for you, etc. Yeah. Candy says some people don't start on their own accord. Some people are slip their first dose, then like the feeling and start on their own. It could be the case. It could be the case that that's happening in a coercive situation. I mean, there are a lot of extenuating factors. There are a lot of things that can be contributing to that. Loneliness, is Andrea. Candy said, that's how I started. Absolutely valid. Thank you for sharing your experience too and feeling comfortable sharing that with us. Yeah, it could be. Sandra says depression. Michael, to get more done, right? Like we're thinking about stimulants, you know, a lot of people taking ADHD medications because they need to focus. Think about college, how much pressure that is, or just wanting to stay up to finish that paper or finish that job, whatever it is. Yeah, totally. Boredom, stress relief. All right, so this is great. I could read these all day, but what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to slide 2 on the top. So we answered, why do people use drugs? So now, why don't people use drugs? Why don't they use drugs? So we talked about do, right? Why don't they use drugs? Somebody says recovery. Naomi says personal preference. Aida says grief. Tracy says don't want to get addicted. And I'm glad you bring that up, Tracy, because one thing we'll talk about as we get a little further into the training is you talk about language, right? We have a glossary in the beginning. And I apologize, the lawn people are here doing their lawn stuff. So if you hear, meow, that's just them. I swear I'm not at a racetrack or something. So what I do want to point out with addiction and using that language is we choose at NHRC to not identify with that language. You don't use that language because it's highly stigmatizing in nature. I worked with many clients who used that language and I tried to work with them to get out of that language because a lot of that ends up being internalized, because what goes along often with people saying that they have an addiction or they're quote unquote suffering from addiction is that there's usually a follow-up sentence, which is seeing themselves in a negative light, right? Like, oh, my family says I'm no good, or I can't do this, or I lost my job, or this happened. And that's not always the case for everyone. So instead of using addiction, right, we just use someone's using, right? You're a person that uses drugs, you know, and we keep it at that. Just try to stay away from stigmatizing folks anymore than they've already been stigmatized with the way that our society and media and people talk about people that use drugs, because it's often very unkind, right? Okay, let's see what's going on with the jam. Yeah, and I noticed too with this one, it's a little bit more difficult for folks, I think, for why don't people use drugs, right? Yeah. Tori says, seeing those in my family suffer, me not wanting to suffer from, from addictions. That could be a big impact. Tracy says, did it once and wasn't for me. That's valid. It's not everybody's cup of tea. Yeah, people's experience. I see a lot of it being, oh, I saw somebody go through that and it was painful and I don't want to go through that. Yep. Generational traumas, says Charnel. Yeah, stigma costs too much economically, right? It's not feasible. I just don't want it. I can't afford that. I can't pay for it. Latoya says no interest. Yeah, money, afraid of the effects. Yeah, and especially with the way that, think about DARE programs, just say no with the Reagan administration, the way that Nixon basically launched the entire war on drugs, the way that drugs were talked about was supposed to scare people. It's supposed to scare the crap out of you. I think in our stigma training, we show that commercial where there's like the deflated girl on the couch and they're like, well, she smoked weed and look at her. Now she's deflated on the couch. And you're like, oh my God, I don't want to be like a deflated person on the couch. Like, what is that? And we laugh now, right? Because like where we live in Connecticut, it's legal. So is everybody just going to be deflated all over their couches all day long and just like look like weird pool toys? Probably not. Probably not. All right. Yeah, Joe says this is your brain. This is your brain on drugs, egg and frying pan. The most reductive, like simplistic version. Yeah, you don't know what's in the drug and could lead to death. Because says Tori, I mean, valid line of thinking now with the way that people are talking about fentanyl, right? What I will say though is like in New York City, being in contact with a lot of with like the OPCs, and they do a lot of drug testing there, is that's not the case. We're not finding that all drugs have fentanyl in them, like meth, for instance. Pretty much all our samples of meth are just meth. But we are seeing fentanyl and xylazine, which is like trank dope, as they call it. It's an animal sedative that can cause like some pretty gnarly wounds. We're seeing that in some of our opioids. We're also seeing, fentanyl in with crack as well. So there's And that's a huge cause for concern, because with stimulants and your opioids, if you're opioid naive, meaning you're not really anticipating the sedative effect, right, of the fentanyl, of that quote unquote downer, that can have really disastrous impacts, right, leading to overdose. So that's what we're really worrying about. But that's why we need to talk about these things and listen and have drug checking and have syringe service programs and be open and talk to our clients about what they're experiencing, right? Yes, finding in cocaine. Yep. And it's variable, right? Like what we're seeing in New York City is not going to be what you're seeing all the way out in California. The drug supply and the drug trade differs, right? Pressed pills, Alex, thank you as well. Yep. These are great. These are great. So we could probably do this all day, but yeah, no, thank you for all of this. What I am noticing though is we have a lot more responses with the why do people use drugs and the versus the why don't people use drugs. And why do you think that's the case? Why might that be the case? Why is it easier to talk about why people do drugs versus not using drugs? Am I just thinking too deep? Am I thinking too much about it? You can tell me, be like, you're thinking about it too hard. We're just tired. We're done doing the Jamboard. Could be. The media talks a lot. Jamie says media talks a lot about why people use. There are more reasons to do, says Roosevelt. It could be. Are you finding too that some of the reasons that you put for slide 1 could be the same for slide 2? Could some of the things, right? Like for instance, some people will put religion on both, right? Because in some spiritual practices, there are substances that are used, right? That's totally valid, right? Right. And we talked a lot about, yeah, so fear, easy coping mechanism and a lot cheaper than going to the doctor to get diagnosed. Could be.
Can I just jump in really quick?
Yes, Joe, go ahead. Go right ahead.
I had my hand right. Can I just jump in really quick? This is one of those, like, I can't figure out how to put it in wording. Joe Bruno here, peer support specialist, to peers, and it's a psychological thing. Because like I was even trying to figure out why is it so much easier to answer the question why people use as opposed to why they don't use. I think it's a psychological.
Joe, your audio is super choppy. Can you hear me?
Use is usually into response of something. Like I'm bored, I'm gonna use. I'm trauma, I'm gonna use. I feel like it's a psychological thing. Like you're not gonna, I don't know. That's where I'm at with it. But it's got me kind of stumped.
From what I picked up, I was gonna say what I picked up from what you said was that you were saying like that you said you're a peer support specialist and that you're like talking not only like with other folks, but like even like people that you work with, let's say, about like why is it easier? And you were saying it tends to be like as a result of something where it's like it's easier to do this or I can go and do this. That's what I was able to hear from choppy audio. And then I looked at what you were trying to write in the chat, but I think that was kind of the synopsis of a bit of what I got. If yes, you can just give me like a thumbs up reaction or anything like that. But that's what physiological thing. Yes. Uses response to something. Yes. Okay. Yep. Because yeah, of course you can have a physical response. Obviously like opioids, for example, you have physical withdrawal symptoms when you stop. Benzodiazepine, same thing. Alcohol, same thing. And then you said like that physiological part. One thing that I just wanted to note, Taylor, is that, I mean, I can relate to this. Maybe that's why I want to note it, which is why people don't use drugs. A lot of people talking about generational stuff and like intergenerational drug use, which I can relate to heavily. And yeah, so I find that to be like really interesting because like we try not to, but I also think why people, let's say like, why don't people just like not use drugs? Sorry, I was looking at the chat too, but yeah, it's like, you know, why don't they, like, why do we just like not use them at all? Because also like drugs don't always have to be bad. I think that's something too. that's like a hard thing to grasp because we're so caught up in the fears and the negatives of what can happen and what does happen for some folks. But drugs themselves don't have to be bad. There were centuries of drug use and, like Taylor was saying, spiritual use.
Right. Well,
with
and think about, sorry, Alex, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm gonna bring back up the slides.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I know we could literally sit here and talk about this all day, and this is the whole point, right? Is really to get everybody jump started and thinking and engaging a little bit more about, are we coming into the space with our own preconceived notions that then will have a detrimental impact on the people that we're serving? I know I did when I was in case management. I had a whole list check mark. Is this person using drugs? If so, send them to detox. Send them to treatment. Where's that referral? Are you aligning with the Ryan White standards of care? And me at 22 years old, I'm like, oh, okay, send me to a training, make me learn all these things, make me go through this, and that. And it was really having an impact on the people I was serving. And what happened is I was deemed an unsafe person. They didn't want to download stuff on me because I was an extension of the state. I could call DCF, which is our Child Protective Services, right? I could call security, could call the cops, right? Surveil them. Was I really helping them? No. Nope. Probably harmed way more people than I ended up helping. And that's a part of the role as well, is just that guilt, I think, right? And so a lot of this, the reason we're here is to kind of open up these conversations and talk about the fact that, like Alex was saying, drug use is not inherently a bad thing. Our society manufactured it to be that way. This was done by design. I'm going to repeat that. This was done by design. The war on drugs, we lost. Our ED, Laura Guzman, likes to say we're in war on drugs 2.0 because look at the amount of people that got incarcerated, right? The war on drugs from the 70s, 80s, the war that was waged on Black and brown families, right? Talking about crack babies, talking about the disproportionate sentencing, that had a massive impact on those communities, on communities of color. So it's the reason why we need to really talk about and deconstruct exactly, where our attitudes, where our beliefs are coming from. I mean, look at the fact that, like I mentioned, ADHD medications earlier, right? People take those not because they don't know how to cope well, because they physically are in need of something to help them focus, right? In our world, think about how stressful our world is and how, you can meditate all you want, or you can do this and that thing, but for some people that's not going to work. That's not what they need, but they should have that ability to choose for themselves, right? It's all about bodily autonomy. Choose for themselves what's going to work for them, right? And if we want to get really real with it, amphetamines were highly prescribed for narcolepsy, for weight loss. Back in like the 40s, 50s, there was an inhaler. It was given to troops in times of war because they knew that it would get them to stay up and be able to fight more, and it would also stave off hunger. It was heavily used in World War I. It was used in World War II. Yeah, big time. So before we hop into the next section, any questions, anything coming up for someone? I know that's a lot to open up with, but I really enjoy that everybody hopped fully into that and is ready to go. I think we're going to have like a really, really productive, fruitful discussion. If not, I'll turn it back over to Alex. Oh, and Alex, to get those off the screen, those are probably annotation marks. If
You
have
see me trying to
We're trying
desperately.
yeah, I
in the
know.
chat, I'm like,
I don't know.
If you go up to your toolbar, the hovering Zoom, the ever elusive Zoom toolbar, you go up there, there's an option
Yes.
that'll say like annotate, and then you click on it and you say clear, and it'll clear annotations, because that means that people have the ability to just like write on the screen as you were doing it. So
where the hell do I do that? Also, thank you for the people who can do that for not being juvenile and drawing, like a penis or something. Because guess what? Your names are connected. And then what? Then I'm privately messaging you about your naughty behavior in this meeting.
no,
I'm also trying to buy time because I can't find this damn annotate thing. Here we go. All right.
I think I found it.
I found it and I'm clearing you
Okay, you're
all.
clearing. Good, thank you. I was like, I can't.
Clearing everyone's drawings. Thank you
Yay.
to those
Yay.
who contributed to the confetti in the corner. You know, you would think 3 years in that I would know how to get rid of that, but guess what? I'm a person who's learning new things with you every day. And guess what? I also got this job from having lived experience in direct care. I didn't get it from knowing how to do things on a computer really damn well. I'll be real with you. All right. So can everyone see the screen without a bunch of squiggle lines on it now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Gee, Lord and Savior, here we go. All right, so what is harm reduction? Boom, gonna take it out a minute. So harm reduction, yes, of course, it has to do with drugs. But harm reduction is a lot more than that. Like I would tell people, not everyone has to do it, right? I personally think of like harm reduction as to how I approach everything. I mean, like how I approach my familial relationships, you know, like family members where it's real hard. And I'm like, okay, how can I make this as non-terrible as I can? I do it with like food, stuff like that, or like, you know, things we do maybe where it's like, you know what, I'm going to eat the food that really flares up my Crohn's disease because it tastes really damn good. But then I'll make sure to like take my stomach meds and like maybe cool it for the rest of the week. So I'm not doing as much because we're all human beings, right? All of us engage in risk behaviors. Living in the world is a risk behavior. And if you are someone that society has deemed as someone that they don't want to humanize, that is dangerous in and of itself. So literally harm reduction is everything. It is this crux of social justice and public health. And I really hate how social justice has been watered down to become kind of buzzwordy because it's really supposed to be based around like genuine accountability and equity and like dismantling and completely ripping apart like structures that have been made to harm people. So, you know, we look at these isms on the side, racism, stigma, criminalization in and of itself has caused harm. Look at what happened with alcohol prohibition, how quickly that got turned around when everyone went wild, and also how dangerous drug supply became, right? That's what happens more and more. We just have more adulterants that find their way into drug supply. You know, Taylor mentioned xylazine. Here on the East Coast, it is really common. It's something that I've been seeing for years now and seeing the wounds that it causes. And because it's a veterinary tranquilizer, it's easier. You know, it's easier to pass through. Fentanyl, for example, people be like, why would we add it? Why would we add it? It's so much stronger. And I'm like, do you know what it's like to only have the risk of moving 2 bricks of a drug versus trying to hide 10 to 20? Or when you can have something that's way more potent in a smaller amount. You know, when we look at criminalization, it doesn't do the things always that we think it would, right? Because if it did, I don't think any of us would really have as many jobs. And I personally am trying to work myself out of a job. I don't know about this one, but when I ran that drop-in center, I was always like, I'm trying to work myself out of a job. I hope that this won't be needed, but the reality is it is. Harm reduction, again, I already kind of said this. I'm not someone that reads off the slides word for word. Y'all are going to get this. But really, it's more than just lip service. You got to also look at leadership, for example. So that means employing people with lived experience and not just leaving them as you're a peer worker and that's it. Bringing people that upward mobility of like getting us access to training so we're not just considered peers, or also like paying peers real wages instead of being like, oh, well, you can just get this one that's like $5 less an hour than someone else. But it's more than just peers, right? It just means taking care of each other. You work with people directly, whether you have lived experience with drug use or not. This work is going to be hard, and you're human beings that have your own lived experiences. All right. And then here's a pretty definition for you about what harm reduction is. Big thing that you see in harm reduction, I feel like talking about buzzwords, we have buzz sayings, and one of them is meeting people where they're at. And that's something that, again, I think when we talk about harm reduction more and more, and as it becomes more mainstream, which I'm glad we're having this conversation. What I also see is people using words that they don't know the meaning of, and people calling themselves things without actually embodying those principles and behaviors, right? without actually like walking the walk. You can do a lot of talk with it. You can learn words, you can go to school, you can do a training, you can learn words and things like that. But what does that actually mean if you're not applying it when you interact with people? You know, if you're not actually like implying that, you could go to an implicit biases training, right? And then still interact with all of your clients and be homophobic or racist as hell in how you talk. So harm reduction is about marrying the two of them. And that doesn't mean it's easy or like someone's right, wrong, things like this. It's about like having difficult conversations with yourself, with your community members, right? That meeting people where they're at and not leaving them there means like, I'm seeing where you are. Like, I'm seeing where you are, even if I am not okay, or I feel weird about where you are, or I don't like it, or it's bringing something up for me. I'm meeting you there. I'm going to let you guide us as to like what you want. Here's the tools I can give you. Here's the boundaries I have. And it also means like going outside. So we work with a whole bunch of different types of agencies, right? A lot of people will also say things like, you know, oh, we do outreach. And I ask what that outreach looks like and where it is, because outreach is not going to like a health fair and a clinic only. You got to be where people are. So like when I did street outreach for 3 years, I led a street outreach team in Hartford, Connecticut. And most of my time was spent in encampments, in areas in which there was a lot of open air drug use, a lot of open air drug trade, things like that, like bus stations, things like you go to where people are, because they're not going to feel comfortable always coming out. Understandably so, because it's been proven time and time again that it wasn't safe for them to go and get services, or themselves or others have told them that they're not worth getting services, you know, a whole bunch of different things. So it means like literally getting to people. And it doesn't mean coddling, things like that, but like some folks, especially y'all doing housing, right? You already know there's some people that you got to track down. And you already know, you're like, no, I got to track them down and I got to start putting it out a few days before our meeting because it takes them a while and things like that. And the harm reduction approach to drug use specifically. So one thing I see a lot in not harm reduction, but like in the recovery world, and, you know, like in the peer world, as someone who is a peer myself, is this thought that abstinence and harm reduction like can't be in the same room, or that like they're totally different things. Because abstinence is a form of harm reduction, because abstinence is also a different meaning for everyone. Abstinence could mean abstinence from all drugs, including caffeine, including nicotine, you know, including like other things like that. Or maybe abstinence means I don't use opiates anymore, but I still smoke cigarettes. Or maybe abstinence means that I don't use opiates or benzos anymore, but I do psychedelics every now and then because honestly, like it's fine for me and I enjoy it. Maybe not all the time, but sometimes. And you know, medical cannabis has been really, really helpful for me, actually. You know, it's really helped with my nightmares. It's really helped with my anxiety and my pain. So I use that, but I abstain from these drugs that maybe I had like a chaotic relationship with, or where it's like, you know what, this is too much. Or maybe I'm like, you know what, I don't want to do anything at all. Like, I ain't going to do it. I'm going to stick to like my sugary treats and my really, really highly caffeinated caffeine and my energy drinks. And I'll stick it with there, you know? Then there's managed use, right? Where for some folks, they don't ever hit chaotic drug use. You know, a lot of people think like you use a drug and then immediately it's like you're gonna just have this incredibly tumultuous, chaotic relationship with it where like none of your basic needs are met. And that is the reality for a lot of folks that I love and know. But it's not the reality for everyone. And it's also not the reality for every single drug. So something that I like to also offer to folks is that like we have different relationships with different drugs. Maybe for some people it's like an all or nothing. That's absolutely valid. I know people where that's how it is for them, where it's like they need to go that route. And for other folks, that ain't it. That's not what's going to keep them alive. That's not what's going to keep them well with a quality of life. And then we have safer techniques, right? So let's say you have someone who's using, it doesn't even need to be chaotic, right? But you just want to introduce safer techniques anyway. So if you're someone who's snorting, if you're someone who's injecting, using any sort of drug equipment, I want you to have your own. I want you to ideally be in a space where you feel kind of safe enough, because we're going to get into this risk setting. You know, if you're not in a comfortable space, you might engage in higher risk behaviors. All right. and kind of like I talked about this like continuum of drug use, right? And this is meant to not be linear. I'm someone where like the line helps, but it's supposed to go back and forth. So you can have no use, experimental or situational, social, regular use, ritual binging. So that would be like people who are like, oh, I only do it on the weekends, like that sort of thing. Call them like weekend warriors. Habitual, daily use, but it's like you're still able to meet your daily needs. You just happen to use that drug daily. And then chaotic, persistent use. I personally like the terminology chaotic use. To me, that like embodies what it actually is and feels like, which is that like I'm maybe not like I'm engaging in things where like if I wasn't in a chaotic mind state, like I may not be engaging in these things in the same way. Or like I'm not able to get my basic needs met like at all. I'm not able to do certain things like to maintain myself or like to have housing or a job. And it's obviously much more complex than that, right? Mental illness can do those things too. Like a real bad depressive episode, sans any drug use, can also do that. And then we've just got this other one right here, which is just another kind of like look for it. And something else that it can look like. All right, what do people feel about these? Honestly, just everything we kind of went over and these kind of like continuums of drug use. I threw a lot at you already. But like, so how are folks thinking? What do you think? Have you seen this before? I'm gonna mute myself now.
Can you
A
ask her a
lot.
question again?
Yeah, so I think Alex is just trying to get at, we want to temperature check with everybody because this is a lot of information. And even though we talk about this every single day, this can be really challenging and go against every single thing you've been taught. So even if I might not agree with what you're saying in the chat, I welcome you to say it because this is a space where I'd like us to air it out and to say it. And even if you leave this and you're like, you know what, screw that guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not on the ground here in California. He doesn't get it. He doesn't see this. He doesn't do that. At least we're getting these things out in the open and we're talking about it, right? Yeah. Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Amanda. Really glad to hear that.
This is Jamie from H3. I wanted to amplify too. I keep thinking about this. When we do our homeless point in time count, one of the questions that we do in the survey piece is, and maybe we didn't do this in the last one, but in previous ones, when we're asking like, do you have a physical health condition? Do you have a behavioral health condition like mental health or substance use? But the question actually isn't, do you have these conditions? It's, is it disabling? And for me, like that was such a profound distinction because like I have mental health stuff, right? I have depression, anxiety, but it's not disabling. It doesn't prevent me from holding a job. It doesn't prevent me from housing. If I had substance use, it's not necessarily that. And I think this is what you guys were getting at. It's like, is it from our perspective on the work we're doing, is it about values? Like it's not so much about values. It's like, what's the impact that behavior is having on people's lives is kind of what I hear you saying. So are there ways that we can like reduce the negative impact without villainizing the actual behavior itself? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm getting at. And honestly, like I'm biased. And like I said, one, long-winded, two, like I'm very passionate about this. And selfishly, because like the harm reduction approach is what saved my life. NAAA did not work for me. And what I really struggled with was when people had to tell me that I had to identify as once an addict, always an addict. That pisses me off and makes my blood boil to my core instantly. I don't judge how people self-identify. If that is how you identify, absolutely do what you need to, but don't you dare put that on somebody else. That is for us to decide if I am, because you don't get to tell me that I'm always something because of something in my life. Because for me, I'll be real, just share that like if I hadn't been using drugs and for me it was chaotic where I had negative impacts, I would have been dead. And could my drug use have killed me? Yeah, it almost did. But it's also what kept me alive for a few years, to where like I get to do things like this, and I get to talk with people, and like, you know, get to learn from other people, and like meet really cool people that got to do all these things I didn't get to do. You know, and like you get to make something of it. And I feel like it's like a unique experience where you don't have to have lived experience to be a harm reductionist. Some of the most like badass like advocates I've met have honestly been people who are like, nah, I'm like straight edge Taylor, like like I drink my little like CBD seltzer, but like I've also seen Taylor like go harder for people who use drugs than some other people who are like, I got 25 years in, but they still call everybody junkies and crackheads. Like, sorry to be like rough with the language, but it's like that's how folks talk. And I don't knock how people talk about themselves, but it's like when we talk about other people like that, like they hear it, we know it. Like, let's be real, we know it. Like, the whole point of this, I feel like with harm reduction too, is like we're working with people whose entire livelihood and survival has depended on reading you, reading the room, reading the situation and the air of like the energy where they are in a second. So like, let's have these tough conversations. Like, let's have these difficult conversations, because inauthenticity and being not genuine, it ain't gonna get you anywhere. And y'all already know that. Like, they know when you're BSing them, and you know when they're BSing you. And it's like, you don't gotta do that with me. Just tell me what's going on. I might not give you an answer you like, but like I can at least work with you. All right, I'm gonna get off my soapbox, shut up, and let Taylor get us into some principles of harm reduction
Yeah.
and use that framework.
Thank you. Yeah, and then I promise there is a break in sight. I know this is a lot, and especially after the principles, because we like to tether it to some real life experiences. It can be a lot. You can go to the next slide, Alex. And I'm loving the chat too. Thank you very much, everybody, for sharing. And I'm so glad this could be affirming for you. And thanks, Alex, for calling me out. I was saying this morning, I was joking about like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling out of it. I had 2 non-alcoholic like grapefruit seltzer things yesterday because I'm in that part of my life as very much a like plain dad who was like, what's the newest non-alcoholic beer or whatever. I feel like, honestly, folks, I feel like garbage. If I have like 1 or 2 drinks, I just feel awful. I'm at that point in my life. So maybe I'm old. I don't know. All right, so we're gonna get into the principles. There's 6 of them, and actually, if Alex could, or I'll do it later if she's busy, link you to our PDF. We have like a sheet that lists the 6 principles, so you can take that with you, tack it up on a board, whatever it is, print it out, have fun, make it into a paper airplane, throw it at a coworker you don't like. I don't know. So, all right, we're gonna jump into it. We can start with the first one, health and dignity. So I think a lot of people resonate with this. This is something that came up so many times. It has come up in my own life as well. So for folks that are on the phone, I'll read it out for you. Health and dignity establishes quality of individual and community life and well-being as the criteria for successful interventions and policies. So I know we were talking a lot about policy in the chat. You know, Joe had some really good things to say about like why. We're always trying to ascertain the why. Why is someone doing this or someone doing that? And what I push back with is sometimes people just are. Sometimes it just is, right? But it's all about that individual's choice and what feels good for them. All of this, the core behind harm reduction is ultimately bodily autonomy. That's why our movement not only aligns with people who use drugs and substance use, right? It's also sex work. It's also things like gender affirming care, which, hello, is a huge topic right now that's up for debate that really shouldn't be up for debate. Nationally, right? What are there like 450 anti-trans or anti-LGBTQ pieces of legislation now? Reproductive health, reproductive justice as well, everything that we've been seeing with abortion and you know, pregnant people. So all of these things align because, like I said, all of this has to do with bodily autonomy. So one of the examples I like to give when we do this is that when I was working at a federally qualified health center, I had a good amount of people on my caseload when I was an HIV case manager who were also co-infected with hepatitis C. Perfect example, I had this gentleman who is still actively using, you know, periodically he would inject heroin, inject fentanyl, and also use cocaine. And he came back reactive and positive for hep C. And the provider, instead of saying, oh, I'm going to start you on treatment because we know that there's treatment, there's a cure for hep C, right? It only takes about a few months. The provider said, well, you know what? You're telling me you're not going to stop using. I'm not going to treat you. And even though I was there in the room, literally hearing and experiencing this with my own eyes, and pushing for this provider to treat the patient, right? To treat this person, this human being, he would not do it. Because his whole thing was, well, you know what, you're not going to stop using. I'm not going to treat you until you're done, because you're just gonna increase your viral load. You're going to get it again, and we're going to waste all this money on you. He's being a gatekeeper essentially, and telling that person that he knew more than them and he knew their body better than them, which was basically medical malpractice and neglect. And from there we had issues, right? But this is not uncommon. This was something that happened only probably about 6-7 years ago, and I know for a fact that providers still think this way. But that's what we're talking about when we talk about health and dignity, treating someone with dignity, with care, with respect. That provider did not do any of those things, and ultimately that man's health suffered as a result of it and went untreated for probably about 6 months of his liver being ravaged, because we know Hep C affects the liver, right? And what does that also affect? His body's ability for his HIV medications, and this man was on other medications as well, to really effectively work in his system. So we saw his HIV, his viral load shoot up as well. So all these things that could have been taken care of with a simple script and the simple pill, it was just prolonged. So that's what we're talking about here. Next slide. All right, participant-centered services calls for the non-judgmental, non-coercive, very important, provision of services and resources to people who use drugs and the communities in which they live in order to assist them in reducing attendant harm. So again, it's that piece of like, does that person have autonomy to make their own decisions? Are we pushing them into treatment? Is this like a diversion program? Like New York City right now has this bill called the Treatment Not Jail bill that some folks are pushing, and it's very problematic because it's basically saying, well, you get jail or you go into treatment, and they really have no choice or no say. But what they don't tell you is with a lot of these treatment programs, they're set up in such a way where if you don't match the criteria and you don't fit into that box and you have a quote unquote dirty urine or your UA shows up, boom, they're going to stick you right back into incarceration, into jail, into prison. And then you're going to end up with in a lot worse situation than you would have been otherwise. So when people think, oh, it's great, we're giving people the option for treatment, but when you're pitting them between incarceration and treatment, you're really not giving them a choice, right? Is that really participant-centered services? Not in my definition. Next slide. All right, so participant involvement ensures participants and communities impacted have a real voice in the creation of programs and policies designed to serve them. So for all of you, do you have like a CAB, like a community advisory board? Do you have something where peers and participants can provide you feedback, or do you just have like a little feedback box with that little lid on it in the community room or in the foyer or in the waiting room, and then you check it every once in a blue moon when, you know, the auditors come? How are you really folding in your participants into your program design? You know, it's great to have people with lived or living experience working on staff, but it's different when you're on that flip side and then you're all of a sudden a gatekeeper and you're hoarding resources because, let me break it, I hate to break it to you, but you are, right? Automatically when you're on that flip side of it. Yeah. And if Alex says, and if you aren't, how could you be moving forward? I know one of the things we did when I was working in community health was we had like, I think it was quarterly meetings with our participants and patients, and we had all different walks of life. So we had someone who represented like youth population, older population, someone living with HIV, someone with diabetes, someone with Hep C, you know, queer patients as well. How are we doing to just hold us accountable as well? Because we're getting the millions and millions of dollars and we're saying we're providing services for you, but are we really providing the services that you need and the level of care that you need? That remains to be seen. And usually the answer was no. Just spoiler alert, it was no, honestly. Next slide. All right, participant, socio-cultural factors, thank you. Recognizes that the realities of various social inequalities affect both people's vulnerability to and capacity for effectively dealing with potential harm. So this is a really flowery way of saying that we need to be very intersectional and intentional with our approach. So a lot of times people will talk about social determinants of health, you know, basically things like housing, things like food, your economic standing. Are you employed? Are you unemployed? Are you disabled? Right? How's your health? Where are you living? The neighborhoods that you reside in. So taking all of these things into account, because we cannot separate the person from their environment and how they identify, right? So you're going to have a very different experience. Like myself, I'm a white, transgender, transmasculine person. My experience is going to be very different from someone who is a Black cisgender woman, right? Even if we grew up in the same neighborhood, we're going to have different experiences because of the way that people interact with our gender and people interact with our race and our ethnicity. And those differences produce different outcomes, right? Next slide. All right, last one here is pragmatic and realistic. Does not attempt to minimize or ignore the real and tragic harm and danger associated with illicit and illicit drug use or other risk behaviors. So a lot of people in the chat will be like, well, you know, family members, we've seen family members go through it and the drugs have wreaked havoc throughout our communities and this and that. No part of us are saying that like, oh my gosh, we're gonna just go give everybody free baggies and everybody just get lit and, you know, smoke up with everyone and whatever. That's not what we're trying to say here. Because a lot of times people will tell you harm reductionists are enabling use. We're not, we're just pragmatic and realistic. We are very real about the fact that drugs have always existed and people are going to use them as long as they exist. What happened with prohibition in the 20s? Did that work out really well? No, it did not. Many people died. And what happens when you have prohibitive and coercive policies is that things are made more dangerous. So what happened is when they prohibited and banned alcohol, people still made it, right? They made that bathtub gin, they made that moonshine, but it was hella toxic and it killed a lot of people. And that's what's happening now with our supply because we have prohibitive laws and policies, especially now we see a lot of these like fentanyl homicide laws, which are going to do absolutely nothing to address our burgeoning overdose crisis. Nothing. They're going to penalize people selling drugs who often are the ones using drugs and keeping other community members safe because they understand the supply, right? I'm not relieving anybody of, you know, causing harm to someone else if you've had that experience. And I know that can be very, very triggering in of itself. But my point is this issue is a lot bigger and we need to look up and not look down and penalize individuals and whole communities for the harms that our state and our government have caused and continue to cause. All right, so next slide. So this one we can skip over just for the sake of time. I want to get us to, or actually, you know what, Alex, why don't we do our break? Why don't we do our break since we're a little bit over halfway and I know we're going to be short on time. So let's just break for maybe 2 minutes instead of 5. How's that sound? Is that okay?
I know you want more. I apologize. I cannot give you more.
I
Bathroom
know.
break, get your water.
Go
do a
stretch,
little
go for it.
dance.
All right, so we'll be back. Let's say we'll be back at 15 after. Let's just do that. We'll say 15 after, okay?
This is when I feel like I need tunage, but I don't have any lined up.
I appreciate that. I know we need to get better. That's like the one piece we're missing is the music.
You're great just as you are. This is good enough.
Thank you.
I'm an advocate for good enough parenting and good enough training.
I appreciate that because I'm like, if you can't tell, like freaking 4 cups of coffee deep today. I like could not wake up this morning. So I was like, let me just drink like 3 cups back to back, I guess, you know, some mentalities are, let's just say some mentalities are hard to get rid of, which is I did this and now let me just do a whole bunch to get me really, really awake. And then I'm just sitting here sweating excessively. And I'm like, oh God, these poor folks, I've got like 100 people that are just hearing me spouting off. And they're being so nice about it.
I'm gonna go get some water to dilute my own coffee. I'll be right back.
Right.
Okay. So surprise, we're gonna go back to the Jamboard because we're really good at pivoting. You're probably like, oh shoot, they can't do their breakout rooms. Sorry, we have an activity. We're gonna go back to the Jam. And yes, I did copy and paste a bunch of green checks for everybody here because you're gonna take a green check and drag it over.
I will show. So he's not kidding. A million green checks. So I can like grab it from this little bunch and I'll say for me, boom. And it's okay. It'll look messy. You don't have to worry about that. The whole point is just to see like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you can drag and drop which principle, geez Louise, principle resonates the most with you and why. So we have all 6, right? And just because something resonates with us, it might end up being your challenge one too. I always like seeing if people choose the same one.
So how do I get back in there to use that?
All right, I'm going to send it right here. So the Jamboard, if you still, let's say you still have the one up from the thing that we sent before, like from the first one, if you click over, like, here we go. If you can see my little one, it'll say like next frame. There should be a little arrow at the top and you should be able to click it, right? Ideally. But if not, we just dropped the link again. And honestly, if it's just pissing you off and you're like, I can't figure this damn thing out, you can always drop it in the chat as well. Because I just want folks to at least be able to like share and say, you know what, actually, yeah, this one sits well with me. I don't want anyone to be like, this damn computer, and end up chucking their phone across the hall.
Yeah, this is supposed to be not stressful. So it's causing you stress. I'm sorry, and you can hate me for it. I tried to be cute with the check mark. So, oh my gosh, it's okay, Joe. Do you see me? I'm like such a dad. I'm so used to like having to clean up messes all the time, like following people around, making like little marks. I'm like, oh no, oh no. So you're good. Thank
It's
you.
okay. I was the trainer with Taylor before, and I was the one who cleared the board, and people had written a lot, and I hit clear frame, and he said, "Oh no, someone did it too bad," and I said nothing. I just hit the undo button, and he was like, "Oh, they fixed it." I'm like, "Oh, thank God they did." That's oh no, oh no.
It's real. This is live, folks. Okay, we don't know what's gonna happen. Joe, participant involvement. That's my answer. Thank you. Yeah, no, Michelle, I think yours is good. I mean, I don't know which one you are. I don't know if you're the liger or the mongoose or the turtle or whatever it is, but I'm sure it's fine. If you're worried about it, you can put it in the chat. I love this. We're getting a lot of varied answers, but I'm noticing a lot of health and dignity. And we find that a lot. Does anyone want to answer the why? Like, why did you choose health and dignity? Why is that resonating with you? Oh, it automatically assigns you an animal, Michelle. We don't know why it does what it does. But yeah, tell us in the chat or come off mute. Like, why are you resonating so much with health and dignity? Why? Danelle says participant involvement. Michelle says because everyone deserves to have health and be treated with dignity. Simple enough, right? Definitely. Yeah, some people will say, well, if we don't have our health, then what do we have, right? If we're not treated with dignity, then how are we being treated? What do we have left? Dahlia says health promotes clearer decisions and self-love, hence being able to live with dignity. Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Yeah, to grab one of the checks, you just need to select the arrow icon on the left. Yep, so as you can see on Alex's screen, she's highlighted that arrow, and you can just go ahead and grab one of those. All right, so now that we've answered this one, can you guess what the next question is going to be? Yeah, I know, more checks, I know. So which principle challenges you the most and why? We talked about which one you resonate with the most. So which one's the most challenging? Like as I was talking through each of those slides and giving examples and, you know, exploring that a little bit, what was kind of coming up for you? What were you feeling like? I don't really know I'm still not clear, or I don't really know how to put that in practice, or I don't know how that applies to my work. Yeah, Gwen says participant involvement, because without their buy-in, you can't even get started. Yeah, right. It's a good point. Without our participants, without our patients, without the people we serve, who really are we? Are we just in the way?
And I think also as I'm seeing folks, oh, I like when people, if you don't click it, you're drawing a little check. I think too, because like something challenging you doesn't necessarily mean it's like, oh, I think this is wrong or I don't like it. Like participant involvement, I'm not surprised everyone's clicking it, because as someone who ran a drop-in center, trying to get folks to talk to you and stick around when you ain't got no funding to give them cash or something else, or like trying to just get someone to show up to a meeting, that can be real hard sometimes. That's when you got to get extra creative.
Yeah. Andy says, pragmatism and realism is a challenge for me, because no matter how many positive steps my clients make, the powers that be don't care. They only see the drug addict. They don't see the strides they are making to better their life. That is real. That's really real. They're like, I've done 10,000 things in between, right? All these referrals, or I've showed up, and we talk about any positive change, right? Any little change. And when someone shows up, showing that they want something different maybe, or they want to engage in a different way, or they want to change their relationship to use, all those things matter, right? We need to signal those. Yeah, go ahead.
You actually gave your.
Stephanie, did you have something to say?
Oh,
Oh, it's okay. I was getting excited. I'm like, I want to hear from someone. Yeah, that's a huge point. And, unsurprisingly, pragmatism and realism is probably the number one. When we show this slide and do this exercise, people are like, some of these things are really difficult to put into motion. And that's what we're going to talk about in a little bit, at the end of this. Yeah, Autumn says, even when I got on Suboxone, I was still constantly being told that's not sober, despite how much progress I'd made in my recovery. That's super disappointing. I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, you don't need me to tell you that that's terrible. And they don't get to define that for you, right? Because people are operating with a very narrow kind of mindset. They're operating with like the DSM, that huge, psychiatric Bible, to basically be like, all right, do you have substance use disorder? You marked off this, and this, and that. And then if you look at it and they talk about productivity, right? What does that mean? What is their definition of being a productive person versus us being a productive person in our daily life? Some people are just like, I'm happy that I got out of bed. Hallelujah, I got out of bed today. I took a shower today. I showed up at my appointment today. I used, maybe half as much as I usually use, right? I took my meds. All those things add up, and they need to be celebrated, right? And if we're not showing up for our clients in that way and they have no supports, then who is? Right? All right, Alex, we can jump back in. Yeah. Oh, and see the annotate thing again. You're gonna have to do what you did earlier. I know. They're making you work today. I believe in you. You can clear it.
Said, oh, she said that she doesn't really know how to do this and that she's nervous about it. Let me do it again, because she said she had 4 cups of coffee and is sweating. Here we go. Clear. There we go. No, I don't take it personal. Here we go. Unpacking. So we work with a variety of folks. This can go on forever, right? We've got about 35 minutes left, so I do want to be cognizant of our time, but I also wanted to kind of bring something in that I feel like was suitable for y'all, which is that, when we talk about drug use, for example, and we talk about harm reduction, everyone says drug use, which, yeah, it is. It's a lot of that, right? But it's also more, because the thing is, you're also working with sex workers, and these two things don't always go hand in hand. Not everyone who uses drugs does sex work. Not every sex worker uses drugs. That is something that I feel like is constantly put, like they have to go hand in hand. Oftentimes they do. I would say oftentimes in our work specifically, I say our, like I'm still doing it. Apologies, I can't claim that. But like I say that for like us when you're doing housing services and outreach, it's like if someone's already coming to you because they're experiencing homelessness, they're outside, they're probably at a point where like they're in a chaotic, like whether it be mental health, drug use, a combo of both, they're in a point in their life where they need help getting their basic needs met, right? So I put that into frame just because I think sometimes for folks, what happens is since we're so used to seeing that direct community, we think everyone who does those things is like that. We think, well, I see this at my job every day. So then they think that everyone who uses drugs is going to get like that, or they will be like that, or that everyone who engages in sex work only engages in it in the way that they see it at their job with their participants. Because mind you, we all see sex workers in different types of our jobs. And I'm telling you right now, if you think you're not serving sex workers, you are. They just haven't told you yet. Or they might not feel comfortable telling you yet, right? And not like you need to have these conversations as in depth, but I want to just kind of give you some stuff. So that way we can kind of like have that, let's say you've never talked about sex work before or like heard about it, or it makes you really uncomfortable. I want to just offer you a little bit about what it is. So that way you can kind of like have a scope. I'm not going to get, like into detail about like what sex work means for folks or anything like that. But just a basics kind of like public health look at it, right? So starting off with this, and this can be applied to anything. I use this same model when I would talk about consensual sex with high schoolers and when I would do consent workshops in college. Talking about how like, you might be consenting to sex with someone in this setting, but maybe not like this, or maybe not when I'm drinking or something like this, and how all of these things go in together. That's why it's a circle, is because it all feeds into one another. I felt like it was way too basic when they just said drug set setting, because I think that this is a really cool model for any type of risk behavior, right? So the risk itself. So the risk itself could be that I'm utilizing a drug that is illegal. So the fact that it's not legal means that I have risk of, criminalization. It also means that I don't totally know what's in my drug supply. There's no way for me to know what's actually in it unless I'm using like a mass spectrometer FTIR drug checking machine. Fentanyl test strip is only going to tell me if there's fentanyl in it. It's not going to tell me how much fentanyl. It's not going to tell me how much cut is in it, how much isn't. For those of you, since I don't want to assume that everyone has extensive, experience or knowledge on drugs, when you buy drugs, and if you do know all of this, I'm sorry if it's like really redundant and I'm like drug explaining to you, but I've had this come up in, I guess, trainings before, where like, so if someone buys cocaine, for example, when you're buying powder cocaine, you are like never getting just cocaine. Someone was very surprised by that. And I was like, no, you get a lot of caffeine powder and cut and like other stuff in it because you're trying to make the drug go by. So like same with like opiates, for example, like fentanyl. It can have a huge variation in how much like percentage is present, but it's never actually that drug. I will tell you my very, very quick, fun, I guess, semi-funny story. I was at a real-time drug checking conference where we were using those like multi-$1,000 machines, right? And we all brought samples, of stuff from like our areas. And someone from Boston brought in powder, like I said, it was powder heroin. And I know that heroin is different in everyone's supply. So out here on the East Coast, it's more of a powder base and it has like a lightish brown tinge to it. We haven't seen that in a long time. But this person, we put it on the drug checking machine and come to find out there was some Swiss Miss hot cocoa mix that they put in it to make it look brown. So that way you thought it was dope. So it's like people put whatever. And the thing is, like, I laugh, we all laugh because honestly, everyone there, has used drugs. And so we all laugh, or a lot of people also there had sold drugs. So it's like funny, like we laugh. And then with the same token, it's like, what research exists about what happens when you inject that into your bloodstream? Like there's no research to know like what adulterants are doing. We might know what the drug itself is doing, but like that's only if you have that drug, and that's a small percentage of what you're actually getting. I don't know what necessarily mannitol or like caffeine powder, vitamin B in excess is going to do, whether I'm like snorting, ingesting, smoking, whatever. Oh God, add some whipped cream and you're ready to go. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I just read that out loud. As you can tell, I'm one of those people like reads my texts out loud. All right. So we have the risk itself, and then we have the set. This is like your mindset, right? And then setting is your physical or social environment. This is something that I find to be really, really important, right? With our mindset. And something that I use for an example is like, let's say I'm someone who is, let's just say I inject fentanyl. I already know that I like fentanyl. So like, I'm okay with getting fentanyl. That's fine. So, I'm someone who injects fentanyl. So it's like, okay, I get up, I miss the bus. I'm like, shit, I missed the bus. Like, I already missed it. And like, I wake up kind of late, miss getting dosed. I'm like, damn, all right, let me go see if I can find something. I'm going to go find something. The guy who I normally see isn't answering the phone. I'm getting more nervous. He ain't calling. He isn't picking up texts. I'm starting to freak out. This is my usual person. This is who I always go to. I like going to this person because I always go to them. That is harm reduction, by the way. Like even just like trying to stay with that. It's more than just like something where you go to that guy because you know him. It's because you know them. And ideally, if you know them, you feel like that gives you some grant of a relationship, right? Where they can give you a little heads up about something. But let's say I got to go to someone else. So I'm already late, which makes me anxious. No one who I normally like to go to is answering. I'm now starting to go into withdrawal. I'm not feeling good. My stomach hurts. I'm starting to get achy, which is now increasing my anxiety. I finally go to the new person and I get what I need to, right? And now I can't even make it home. I get to my car. I'm in a parking lot. And now I'm already feeling sick. I'm already pissed off. I'm already anxious. I'm probably getting a little emotional because the shit has lasted too long and I'm tired and I don't feel good. And now you're trying to set up your shot. And the thing is, this is where all of these things can have risk, right? Because I don't feel good. So since I don't feel good, I might do something like drop a little too much, or I might not mix it as well, or I might not use a new cotton, or I might drop things and things like that, or I'm in a car, so I'm nervous, so everything's rushed. And that increases my risk of overdose. That increases my risk of injury to myself from using, even if I'm smoking, even if I'm snorting. It's like, if you don't feel comfortable, if you feel like crap about yourself, or if you're already like experiencing withdrawal, like all of these things can feed into one another. We focus so much on drugs, and drugs is just one little part of it. It's kind of like when, anyone here, if you've used drugs and we talk about recovery, it's like they always say, oh, it's the drugs, it's the drugs, it's the drugs. And I'm like, oh, because guess what? My problems did not go away when I stopped using drugs. They were amplified. And now I was sober. And I was like really acutely aware of all of my issues. Like I was like, oh no, now I have to face this like without it. So I really, really, really like this setting. And let me like shut up about this part. Okay. So how this also relates out of drugs. Ooh, did you add this, Taylor?
I did. I was being fancy. You can.
This is good. Sorry, as you can tell,
It's just
I've
extra resources for people when you're going back, just some provider tips and things. That's all.
Yes, thank you. I was like, as you can tell, I was surprised. But I really like this because this is perfect. So I really, really like emphasizing respecting the intimacy of an encounter. If someone is talking to you about their drug use, that is intimate. Particularly if they're like, because they don't necessarily have to. Or they could just lie to you. And if they lie to you, whatever, like it ain't personal, but like you want to also orient things about like what they're doing right. Because guess what? It ain't helping nobody and it ain't helping you if we're only focusing on what's pissing us off. It's just going to make us even more upset and annoying and like annoyed. And again, our observations should guide, but not dictate things exactly. In this one, give yourself a moment if you can between people. I say if you can, and like I feel bad even saying that out loud because I know all of you have caseloads that are like gigantic and that everything is always like back to back to back and people show up and then they call you in between things and then they want to see you right then and there. But if you can, try to give yourself a second because this is hard.
Oh, Alex,
Stigmatized.
just
Yep.
one quick thing. Sorry, just one quick thing. Somebody had written in earlier, and I'm not going to say a name because we promise we keep things anonymous, but this is probably something that many of you experience or comes up. I know it came up with me early on when I was doing case management. So they wrote in, can you talk a little bit about people who continue to make decisions that negatively affect their lives despite lengthy discussions offering more positive pathways forward? Basically the challenge of trying to support / help people who seemingly choose to remain in a spiral that consistently leads them to failure or harm. Yeah, and I think that's a really valid thing. I mean, I have feelings off the jump about that, but just like when this person wrote in, I experienced a lot of that. When I first started, I wanted to come in, I wanted to like, you know, fix everything, everyone, and change problems, and looking at people and clients more as like problems that needed solving rather than human beings that were coming to me with very specific needs that I could then offer options and pathways. And I think that's when it really changed for me. So this is obviously just my take. I'm not saying this is the be all end all. Yeah, Jamie, motivational interviewing is a great tool for people that are ambivalent about a certain you know, behavior or something that's going on with them that they are kind of yeah, just maybe in pre-contemplation mode or stage. But basically, you know, if you are not in the space of doing motivational interviewing, or if you're not comfortable, I think realizing that your goals are probably going to look different from that person's goals, and that's okay. And that's where the boundary needs to be respected, right? So we all have boundaries, and it can be really hard, and lines can get blurred. But I think it's really making sure that we're offering all the resources and the help that we can, but ultimately it's up to that person for how they're going to make their next move, right? Yeah, I'm sure it's disappointing where you have a bed that opened up and you did all that work, right, to get them that place where they can stay and they can go and they can detox, but maybe that person had a terrible experience in a shelter and a detox, right? I know a lot of my clients did, and they would say, well, I got my shit stolen there, or I got treated like I was the scum of the earth, right? And I think that a lot of times in case management or with other providers and clinicians, I would hear my coworkers talk badly about their clients and say, well, they're so stupid, they didn't do this, or they're just shooting themselves in the foot, and I don't know why they're doing this, and I don't know why they're doing that, instead of looking up and saying, why are there only 10 beds in the county? Why is this all that we have? Why are people making policy where there's a curfew and people can't go out, or they can't use, and they can't do this, and they can't do that, and these are the only things that they have access to? And we don't really put ourselves or our clients in a position to advocate and to empower them. So I just invite people to kind of step back from it a little bit and redirect your anger, I think, to the powers that be, right? That have a lot of influence, power, control, money, all those things. And then it becomes quite clear why people decide to do or not do certain things, right? Because it might not automatically be apparent or seem obvious to us, but there's probably a pretty good reason for it. So yeah, I just wanted to address that. I didn't want to leave that.
Thank you for that too, because yeah, that's like one of the hardest parts of it is, especially like the more you know someone. I mean, I'll be real, like all the professional boundaries in the world for human beings, you can't tell me you don't give a crap about people, especially when you become their case manager and you see them all the time, you get to know them. Maybe after a while they open up to you more and stuff like that. And like you give a shit, like you care. And it's hard. What keeps me was like two big things. I'll be real. One was I want this person alive. And right now I'm just going to do my best to keep them alive. Alive doesn't necessarily mean alive and in the shelter. Alive doesn't necessarily mean in an apartment yet. You know, I've done the housing program for people where we're doing homelessness verification a million times. I've called detox for someone and put them in medical transport, the same exact person multiple times, reversing overdoses on the same exact person multiple times, like firsthand doing it. And it's terrible and it's infuriating. And then your boundaries get messed up because this is your job. But how do you just turn it off as a job? Because how can it just be a job? These are human beings that you see all the time and you interact with, and you're human beings. It's hard. The other one I do when I really just want to freak the hell out is I internally have a mantra that just says, I'm being paid to be here. I'm being paid to be here. I'm being paid to be here. And that usually is playing when I'm getting cursed out, or like someone is, you know, it's not me. It's not like they're like necessarily mad at me. They're mad at the situation. And like they're hurt from everything else. And they're like expecting me to do the things to them that everyone else has done to them and treated them that way. And so like, I'm just getting cursed out and being called out my name a million times. And so I go, listen, I can tell that you're upset, but you can't talk to me that way. Like, you can't speak to me that way. I would never speak to you that way. And I understand that you're upset, but you can't talk to me that way. Like, do we need to take a walk? Do we need to go outside? I was very lucky in that I smoked cigarettes, which are very valuable. So it was like, you want to go have a smoke? So like literally just say, or if someone's freaking out and they're trying to fight, I'd be like, come have a smoke with me. Let's go outside. Because the other thing too is like, people need room. I talk with my hands. I need room. If I'm mad and I'm upset, I need room to do it. If we're in your tiny office, you're probably going to feel a lot more intimidated by those big emotions and feelings because we're in a tight space. Like, if we can get outside, give some room. That's a luxury that not everybody has, of course. But like, people got big reactions to big things going on, including us. I've popped off before where I'm like, oh shit, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. Like, and you tap in a coworker if you can, if you have that luxury, where I'm like, oh, this is hitting me, like, and I can't separate. I need a second. And stigmatizing language, this has been up for a few minutes. I think y'all know this. I will just say the PWUD, another acronym soup, people who use drugs, just person first language. I could go a whole other training, actually there's a whole other training on stigma, about like how we stigmatize certain drugs and stuff like that. And I'll just say, let's look at that cocaine versus crack epidemic. We have 100-to-1 sentencing ratio for something that literally just includes some baking soda, a microwave, and some water, and smoking instead of snoring. They're about the same thing. In the essence of time, pause, Taylor. Here we go. I want to get just to the sex work because we've been talking about harms. And honestly, I feel like it's been very dark, which this isn't an easy conversation, but I think that we've talked a lot about harms that come from drug use all throughout this. And since we only have a certain amount of time, one thing I feel like a lot of folks don't get access to is a quick convo on sex work. And just kind of giving you a little bit of like what that looks like. Taylor, you all right if I skip that one? Okay. Yes, and someone talking about experience of trauma, mind you, of just what you did, because like you might not have been using drugs for trauma before, but I bet you're gonna have a lot of traumas after. Or also another thing, I don't know how it is for you, and it's not super common. I also have some folks that just prefer to be outside. They don't want to be in a shelter like at all. Or they're really scared to be in an apartment, whether it be drug use or just in general. I've had that particularly with folks who experience psychosis sometimes. All right, so sex work, little tidbit. This is not a sex work 101. That's a whole other training too, but just something. Sex work, which I want to just bring to it, is not automatically trafficking. We see this a lot when we're talking about policy, and I've seen policy getting brought up a few times in here, which is interesting and cool that y'all care about policy. But policy is shit. And policy is usually written in very, very veiled language on purpose to look like it's causing things to be helpful that usually cause harm. Particularly when it comes to things like sex work, right? No one is okay with trafficking, particularly sex workers, because sex work is a consensual act. So sex work doesn't mean that I necessarily love that I have to do it or that I feel super empowered every moment of me doing that. But I'll tell you right now, I didn't feel super empowered or loved every part of any job I ever had. And I definitely felt exploited and overworked and used and tokenized in other jobs too. So this is just offering to you that some folks engage in this work and they choose to, right? So it's a consensual exchange of sex for goods or services. It could be a place to stay, some food, companionship. I was given permission. One of my friends who does sex work told me, it's a meme you've probably seen online, whatever, that sex workers use. And it says, you have sex for good morning texts and I have sex for money. And I thought that was funny because it comes to like this point of like people do things for different reasons and stuff. And I like, obviously it's more complicated than that, but I was like, I like that. And that I just thought that was funny as hell. So again, it's not automatically trafficking. Things, particularly when we're talking about homelessness and drug use, can get real dicey, right? Where people can get into these coercive situations, which is a nasty reality, but it's a reality where things can be coercive. And that's when you start getting into being trafficked, right? Or Like for example, minors, you can't consent, so it's automatically trafficking. People with different like power dynamics, let's say you're incarcerated and it's a CO situation, automatically you can't consent. Developmental disabilities, where it's like someone's in like a Department of Social Services group home, and like your staff, like that, even if you're all adults, you can't consent. Sex work is a harm reduction issue, it's an equity issue, and it's stuff that our program participants are already engaging in. Very quickly, guess what? I'm going to talk to you about sex. One of my first jobs was teaching sex ed to high schoolers. So I'm already used to all of the teen boys giving me the nasty, silly questions and reactions. But it's also, it depends. Sex work, I think people think of as one thing, and that it's automatically like street-based services and like full service sex work, for example, which would be considered like penetrative sex work. That's what a lot of people think of. But when we're talking about like risk setting, right? The risk in and of itself can be the type of sex we're having, you know? So if I'm doing manual stimulation, which is like use of a hand, that's going to have less risk than if I'm doing like vaginal penetration, particularly if I'm like not using condoms and stuff like this. So I bring this to it to kind of give you the idea that not everyone is doing that. And also there are sex workers who are never even touching you. There's a really, really badass kind of like famous sex worker who's a Black woman out of New York, and she's a dominatrix. And one thing that she's known for doing is making all of her rich white male clients read like Black feminist theory books and like stuff like that. So it's like, it looks very different depending where you are. And it isn't always glamorous, of course, as well. But yeah, so this is types of sex. Not everyone is just having penetrative sex. So the set, right, of sex work. So if you're using drugs, that in and of itself, like your mindset, that can skew things. Or if I'm feeling sick and I need to get money quicker, I might do something that I need to get more money quicker and deal with kind of like the risk after, right? When you're trading sex in person, that's when we get way riskier because it's so much harder to do like a risk assessment. And I will try not to go off on the SESTA FOSTA thing, which was specifically laws that were passed that were supposed to go against like web pages, hold them like criminally liable for like trafficking of children. And what occurred is that all of the consensual sex workers then also lost access to like vetting people and being able to go through risk assessments and being able to say, hey, I only do these services. Instead, now I'm negotiating these things in much riskier situations, which increases violence from clients as well. Also, those who do sex in person, like sex work in person, you know, for example, camming, people are all okay with that. But if someone says that they do sex work in person and it's not stripping, people automatically heavily stigmatize them. Honestly, they stigmatize all types of sex workers, but. And then again, setting. So understanding if someone's outside, if they don't have the capability of carrying things for themselves, if they don't have access to like hygienic products and clean water. So like, you know, things to just clean up after yourself, and to clean your body up to feel fresh and to also help like literally rinse, stuff like that as well. And then of course, low or no income. You might do certain things again. Oh no, what happened? Sorry. No, I messed it all up. Apologies. We're trying to get our basic needs met. That's what I'm trying to say. And sometimes, no matter what, we engage in it. You might pick up an extra shift and throw out my back in that extra shift. Okay. So which of these harms can increase, whoa, my goodness. Which of these can increase risk of harm for sex workers after everything we said?
All of them.
All of them?
Is that because you saw me clicking ahead? Trick question, everybody wins. It's all of it. And that's the whole point, is that like, I don't want you to come away from this training with like, wow, Taylor and Alex just told me everything about sex work and everything about harm reduction, and I totally get it now. No, I hope you come away from here confused as hell and being like, what was that? And like, then really start questioning why you think about certain things. Why do we do that? Why do we have that policy? Is that why my client acts like that? Ooh, is that why I act to my client like that? Is that why like I behave that way? Like, I hope that this instills curiosity as to like why we think about things the way we do. Why do people do the things that they do? The world may never know. But how do we react to it? Yes, ma'am. decriminalize it all, putting it into practice. I think this is good because this is going to be kind of like what we're going to talk about, close out with conversation. And don't worry again, everyone's getting the slides, everyone's getting a recording. Taylor and I are going to drop our contact info. I mean it. You can always email. You got a question, feelings, thoughts after. If you're like, I hated everything you said and I want to tell you why, tell me why. All right, Taylor.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry, I was just so busy with the chat. Oh my gosh. All right. So yeah, and if people want to know like more about like why decrim not legalization, we can talk about that. There we have a whole sex work training, very involved with Decrim New York and that whole movement. But okay, with that said, since we have 10 minutes left, I think what we're gonna do is skip forward to the next slide. No, we'll do the next one. We'll do the last slide because we can talk forever. Yeah, thank you. So we'll end on this one. So this by no means is an exhaustive list of every single harm reduction service, but if you could put in the chat, which of these services are you actively doing right now? I just kind of want to see, because even though we have housing providers here, right, there could be other pieces to this that I'm just not aware. Maybe you're doing like condom distribution. Maybe you're operating a syringe service program. I don't know. Maybe you're giving naloxone or Narcan to your clients, right? Autumn's carrying Narcan. There we go. Housing first. Yep. Overdose prevention. Okay, Candy. Housing first. Yep. Housing first and referrals. Yep. And where are you largely referring to? I'm curious. Are these like medical referrals? Are they like vocational employment? What does that look like? Because a lot of people, contrary to popular belief, think that like the syringe service programs or the overdose prevention centers in New York City, they're just doing that. They're just giving syringes, they're just giving condoms, they're just doing HIV and Hep C and STI testing, where with the OPCs, you know, they get all this press about, oh my gosh, they're letting people inject and smoke crack and, you know, shoot up in the building. Yeah, and there's like 10,000 other things going on there. Like they do a whole acupuncture clinic there, which is amazing, right? And it's really well utilized. Yeah, and they're doing it all in your bathrooms too. They really are. If you're like, they don't do that here, they are doing it in your bathrooms, right? Do you have locks on your doors? Do you have timers set up, right? Do you have open conversations with your participants and clients? Right, because God forbid somebody passes out, they're using in the bathroom because they're like, wow, you have a mirror in here and you have great lighting and I can see this vein in my neck because that's where I'm injecting, and they pass out and you're not able to get in there. What happens? Right? Let's see, Mary says, our team oversees the housing resource referrals, but occasionally we get inquiries outside of housing and try to connect people to applicable providers in the community. I love that. I love that. Drop-in clinic. Yes, Gwen. Drop-in clinics are great. Alex could talk about that all day. When I was at my last job at our SSP, we had just opened like a queer drop-in center that we were getting off the ground, but amazing because you can do so much with that space in terms of programming, groups, and just getting people connected, and or just a place to like chill out and take a freaking nap on the couch. Some people honestly would just wander in because we were right down the street from the hospital. I always joke that they could like dump you out in a wheelchair and you just end up at our doorstep. Like literally that's what would happen. And they'd be like, I'm hungry. Be like, here's a cup of ramen, like here's a granola bar, you know, here's a bottle of water. Do you need to just like chill out and watch TV? And sometimes that's all people needed. They didn't need us to jump down their throats and be like, do you need an HIV test? Do you need this, that, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure our funders, I'm sure DPH would have been like, why don't you test that person? But that is freaking annoying. Get out of my face with that swab. I don't want that crap. Get out of here. I just want to sit on the damn couch and eat some ramen. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to do that too. Let's watch Maury and let's eat some freaking ramen on the couch. I mean, amen. Right? So, yes, I'm just going back to the chat here. Yeah, endlessly wishing safe consumption sites could become more of a thing. You know, we are so behind Autumn. I always tell people a little bit of history is that safe consumption sites or safe injection facilities or OPCs, you know, whatever you want to call them, they have been a thing since the late 70s. I believe in Amsterdam was one of the first ones that people forget about. They talk about the one in 1986 that opened up in Bern, Switzerland. But since then, there are hundreds, I think there's like 200 or so open internationally in so many dozens of countries. So we are really far behind. When we talk about harm reduction here, it's disheartening to hear some of the regressive conversations, people have about us enabling or doing this or doing that, and we're causing more harm because these things have decades worth of research behind them. And it's awful to say that because some people, the only things they'll respond to are research and evidence instead of people's lives. And I hate that we have to present in that way to say like, this is the amount of money you're going to save if you train or you do this, or this is the intervention you need, when really it's all about people, keeping people alive, right? Maybe it might not be in the way that we want them or you want them to be. Like we were talking about in the chat, I had a hard time in the beginning with clients who'd be like, I don't want the Section 8 voucher, Taylor. I'm going to go sit in my tent under like I-95 and I'm going to go chill, but I'll see you in 6 months for my update. And I was like, no, I have a bed and like it has a kitchen and like, no, I want my freedom. I don't want a landlord coming on my door and telling me what to do and all these responsibilities. I don't want that, right? I-95, yeah, and dead folks can't recover either. Yeah, thank you, Autumn, for putting that in the chat as well. So basically, like I said, this slide is not exhaustive, but these are many of the things that syringe service programs or harm reduction programs do. And if they don't do them, they link and they talk to one another. So yeah, with that said, I want to give you a little bit of time to ask us questions. We'll wrap it up here. We'll hang out here for at least the next 5-6 minutes or so. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. So yeah, thank you so much for being a great group. Love it. Love it, love it, love it.
You guys are fantastic. We're going to leave a little time for questions. I'm just going to drop in the chat. We have a quick survey that's just designed to like see if this training met your needs, if there are other things that you want more information about. We will be sending all this information out to you by email, so don't worry, you're here. We have your emails when you registered, but please take a minute to do the survey when you get off of here, just because you'll remember. But I'm going to be quiet so you guys can answer questions.
Ooh, tiny home parks. Interesting, right? I think that I'm just very aggressive, I guess. I think that like a lot of people write policy that is just band-aids and they do it to get more votes so they get voted into a new term and they don't actually look at sustainable change like at all. So Connecticut, for example, and basically everywhere, I just see so many buildings that are emptied and where there's so many different housing models where also folks who are, living outside where they can also like help take care of themselves, and you can create communities where folks take care of one another. And they do have programs like that exist. I think that like providing baseline housing for folks is an ideal, right? That's something that we should be working towards. That's where the whole pragmatism and realism part of harm reduction comes in though, which is like, how many times do we really get funding for that? So I think that like when we're talking about things where like folks are creating like homes and like those like tiny homes and stuff like that for people who are living outside, I think that's great. But what else are you doing? Are you getting those folks services for other things they need? Are they getting vocational services? Are they getting help with how to make budgets? So that way they know how to actually like pay bills, how to orient that type of stuff. So that way, like once they're off your caseload, do they know how to do anything? Like, or have you made them completely reliant on systems to take care of them? And if they are someone who really just does need systems to help care for them, because of course there's folks who have needs like that, then they just need a higher level of care and probably like a Department of Social Services type help with that as well. But my big thing is anything that you introduce, how can you create it to be actually sustainable for folks? So that way, when they leave you, they can still keep going, as opposed to like, oh, here's your housing voucher. Now figure out how to get a job that you haven't had in 10 years and how to work with society and everyone else. Oh, do we have a hand raised?
Yes.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Because when I said a tiny homes park, it's because it incorporates all of those services. We do check-in, we do training, we do everything from teaching people how to brush their teeth, literally, okay, simple things, getting them into community, getting them to understand how to listen, how to receive information, how to act within the system, because many people just have not lost, but forgotten some of those natural things that many people assume, okay? We don't assume anything. We meet them where they are, and then we help them along the way to not just the tiny homes is a 3-year project, where in those 3 years, we want to help them to learn how to live within community, and we want to help them to learn to get jobs. We help them to learn how to build tiny homes so that they can build the next group of people's tiny homes. And as they grow, our dream, it hasn't happened yet, but our dream is for them to go to the next layer, which is to buy their own home and to give that tiny home back to the next person that needs it. So it's really a process, and it's an experiment in conscious living, so that we actually acknowledge that we all come from issues, we all come from stuff, and we have to be able to love one another in spite of our stuff. Okay, so that's our goal. And we're doing that in Oakland and Richmond, California.
That's amazing. I really appreciate also you mentioning doing things as basic as talking about hygiene. That was something that like I did, was I would teach hygiene. I did like the hygiene group when I worked at an adolescent group home. And so this was a group home where youth had been criminalized, but they were all sex trafficking survivors, and they were in a locked unit, and it was kind of like an alternative to juvie, right? But I did the hygiene part, and a lot of these girls had been through foster systems over, and it's like no one was able to teach them like basic type things, or like when you get a home, what are things that you do? What cleaning products can you not combine, without knocking yourself out, like stuff like that, because it's like not everyone's had the luxury of being taught of, like certain things, or like that you're supposed to sanitize surfaces, or like, what do you mean I have to check the temperature of meat for something, or like stuff like that, that we might think is regular, but it gets forgotten or lost. So that's amazing. Like, I gotta say, I haven't heard of many programs that do all of that. They'll do things like, oh, we'll teach you how to make us more stuff.
No,
Well,
we
skills
look
training.
at so many programs that do not work, okay? We've looked at so many programs that just fall short. And what we want to do is have a comprehensive program that, I'm not saying we're going to get everybody, but the ones that we do get, we want to help them to grow into totally well-feeling people, okay? So that they learn how to work within the system. That's what's so important. It's going to take time. It's not like a slam dunk 90-day program, then you're out the door. No. This is a process, and we want to deal with homeless women and children. We also want to deal with any other individual that's willing to go into the system and work with it and then give back. Because you don't just get fixed yourself, you turn around and you help the next person. And so that's really important, is have that real community sense to this operation. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. That's awesome to hear about. Taylor, I know Taylor and I always love like hearing, especially from getting to talk to so many different people, hearing like what programs people have, because then I get to go, and when someone says that's not possible, I get to say, actually, I met someone who they had a program like this and they did it. And then it's cool, because then they're like, oh, well, if someone else did it, guess what? More people are likely to say yes to it if they can say someone else did it first.
Yeah.
That's really, really incredible. Yes, basic life skills. Thank y'all so much for remembering what it was called. Yes, it's life skills class. I could not remember what it was called, but I always did it. Yes, the chicken part. Oh my God. Someone talked about cooking the chicken rare. And I was like, no. And then they're like, well, but understandably, they're like, well, why can I make beef and pork, like that's allowed to be medium rare. Like that has pink in the center too. And if no one's talked to you about it literally ever, and you've only ever been in inpatient psychiatric units or foster homes or like other sort of like crap places where you're forgotten, like exactly, how would you know? And like for all of us, we're like, oh my God, how have you not like just decimated your intestines? And to her, she was like, but everything else can be like medium rare. And then I felt like a real piece of crap because I was like, oh my God, how dare we do that? Like, like laugh and be like, oh, we didn't laugh. It was more like the fear response of like, oh, Jesus, that's so bad. And they're like, I don't know. Exactly. How would you know? You don't know what you don't know.
So I just want to know we're at 12:05. I know folks have
Yeah,
things
thanks for
to go
staying
to,
on.
but this was tremendous. Alex and Taylor, this was tremendous. I will resend the slides and whatnot, and also I'll send you guys the surveys after. I'm sure it will be a love fest. But definitely if folks have questions, feel free to reach out to us. I'm going to put our email in again and we can forward on if for some reason you don't have the information. Let's see, health.org. And
Where's the survey? I don't see the survey.
yep, I'll put it in again. Hold on one second. There we go. Okay, so it's a link to a forms, Microsoft Forms.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, I just want to make sure it's actually working.
Mhm.
I think that's it. Alex and Taylor, thank you. Go have your afternoon break because you're on the East Coast. No more
Thank you.
coffee, Alex.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know. She's
No
done.
afternoon coffee for you.
Thank
don't
you,
need
everyone.
Thank you all so
Yes.
much. And again,
Very,